Hello, I'm Richard Gayton, and we want to welcome you to Halo Love and Country. And Halo stands for High Altitude Low Opening, and that's an insertion maneuver used by the military where a soldier jumps out of a perfectly good airplane and doesn't open his parachute until the last moment to give the least exposure to stay so nobody can see him, nobody can shoot at him, hopefully, or her. And Love and Country is the name of a movie that I was involved with and a book that I wrote, a novel based on the movie. And we were using all of this as a metaphor for what LGBTQ people go through when they're in the military, which is they spend a lot of, at least when I was in the military in 1970, a lot of energy staying undetected and always having the sense that they're in peril. And that was my experience. Today we have my son, Andrew Gayton, who is not part of the LGBTQ community. And
Not yet.
Not yet. He may join. We may, we may give him a card. Andrew Gayton, who was a 10th Mountain Division soldier and is the father of two wonderful children, my grandchildren, and raised them much of the time with his wife in Connecticut. And we have Candace Winters, who is a Navy veteran, 7 years in the Navy and 3 years in the Army. She's the mother of a daughter and has been married 15 years. And we want to welcome her to the podcast. And we want to hear their stories. I'm going to tell my story just briefly. I started out as an Army officer, a National Guardsman during the Vietnam War. And during that time, they were not calling up National Guard units. So I was a peacetime soldier. I was very briefly an infantry second lieutenant and then became a transportation officer and served doing that. And then just at the end of that, I was getting out of graduate school and I went into the Navy as a medical service corps psychologist. And I spent 4 years on active duty at Bethesda Naval Hospital, Oak Knoll Naval Hospital, Long Beach Naval Hospital, treating families and active duty personnel with emotional issues. And I'm bisexual. And at that time, I was married to a woman, had 3 wonderful children. I'm now married to a man, a Thai man. And instead of 3 children, we have 3 dogs. So that's kind of my story. Going even into the National Guard at that time was a perilous experience for me. I went through Army basic training as an enlisted man, and I had to be very, very careful in what I revealed. And I revealed nothing, really, about my sexual orientation. I felt kind of like an alien in the military at that time. The Army would arrest you. They would discharge you for being LGBTQ. They actively pursued LGBTQ personnel and extorted sometimes the names of other personnel in order to arrest them, throw them out of the military, that sort of thing. As a Navy psychologist, I had many gay young men brought to me to be diagnosed with something so they could throw them out of the military. I'm not sure why they just didn't throw them out, but it was usually because command they were a lot of the times very good people, and command didn't want to discharge them. So, and I remember I had the highest academic scores in my officer candidate school class in the National Guard. And I remember thinking, if they only know who I really was, that would be the end of me. I'd be out of the military. And being in the Navy was much easier going, but still we had to be completely silent and careful what we were doing. So that's kind of my quick story. And I'd like to ask, maybe Candace could tell her story a little bit more, what it was like for her being in the military as a member of the LGBTQ community and as a woman, as a person. And what do you think?
I joined when I was 19. And it was still kind of even before the military. It was just kind of something you didn't talk about, right? Like everybody kind of knew, you just didn't talk about it. So when I did join, I knew that you can get discharged if you were out and open. So it was very, very keep it to yourself. And my girlfriend at the time joined with me, and we actually were in the same unit during basic training, so we had to be very careful, almost just pretended like we didn't know each other. But there was still some, we shared a rack, so we shared bunks. And there's always those accusations, right? You know, these two are too close or something going on. And one of the RDCs, one of the guys that was training us was like, hey, it's kind of obvious when you get out to the fleet, you need to kind of keep it down a little bit. So we both kind of went our separate ways. And then when I went to my first command, I didn't know anybody. I was scared. I was a young kid. I didn't fully know who I was at that point, and it made me question things.
Mm.
So I started to date men just so that I can keep up the image. I didn't know anybody else, and we had to be very silent. You couldn't be yourself. You knew you were constantly looking over your shoulder. There was one gay bar that all of us would go to, and you weren't allowed to take pictures. So if you when phones started coming out with the cameras, they had security walking around the bar to make sure people weren't taking pictures of the people that
Mm.
were at that establishment. So it was a very uncomfortable feeling. And my first deployment was, I had to be somebody who I wasn't, so I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. And then being a woman in a field, I was in a diesel mechanic field, and the pressure was even harder to try to prove myself and be something that I wasn't, so that I can kind of fit in, so that I can make my way. And there was many challenges. I had one uh, peer that wanted my job because I worked on the flight deck, and he wanted to take over it, and he accused me to my chain of command of being gay. So there was an investigation, and everybody that knew me had to lie for me, and it was extremely uncomfortable. I even had one of my male friends, we got married to keep up that facade, so that, I'm like, no, I'm married, I live with this guy, just so that we could try to keep our jobs, because I loved being in the military. I loved serving my country. I felt like I was doing something bigger than myself, but I had people coming after me just because they wanted my job. They were threatened by me for whatever reason they were threatened by. And it's a very, very uncomfortable feeling, having to try to hide that stuff and know that you're constantly looking over your shoulder. You can't go out to dinner with your girlfriend, or because if somebody sees you, they can report you. So the don't ask, don't tell thing wasn't very comfortable.
Wow. Thank you. And you were able to do it for 10 years.
Yeah, I would have retired. I would have stuck with it. I would have actually retired next year if I would have stuck with it.
What years were you in?
2015.
Dang.
Okay. I want to come back to your story more, but let's hear some from Andy. And
Well, I think I mentioned this to you as well, Dad. I went in 1992, and that was, I believe, the year, it was either 92 or 93 that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was implemented. It was actually an order that came down from DOD. But I enlisted in 92 and I got out in 1995. I was an infantryman, upstate New York, Watertown, and there were a lot of changes going on. I remember a lot of changes on trying to, they had like a soldiers initiative for the barracks, for the single soldiers, where they were trying to give us a little more privacy, not as many inspections and not as many restrictions on booze and female guests. But the rules, it always seemed to be very discretionatory. So it would be like the rules would be this, but then actually the way it was on the ground was just purely command driven, whoever was in your chain of command. And so there was a lot of, I got in a lot of trouble from just being like, well, that's not right, and that's not legal. And you get a lot of guff for it. But for the don't ask, don't tell, I remember making a lot of people making fun of it too in the infantry, because it was a very silly, it always felt like a very silly sort of order to give, because it didn't really say much, did it? It said you can't say it and they can't ask you, but that doesn't, it never really made much sense to me. I never really understood it. And I think a lot of the guys didn't really give it a lot of thought. They just mocked it. So, but yeah, I remember that was a big deal in my enlistment. It was under Bill Clinton.
And apparently during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, there was increased harassment
Yes.
and increased.
Candace was talking about that. I can't believe you were in the aughts. You were 2003, you said, after 9/11, 2005. That's shocking.
What was
I
bad?
thought that would all be cleared out by then, but apparently not.
No.
But in many ways, that's the military culture, because it's a very sort of, at least in the infantry, it was a very confrontational sort of just, I don't know. Can we swear on this one?
I
I
don't
don't
know.
know. It's very like, yeah, it's kind of like jock, kind of a jock locker room kind of atmosphere too. So does that answer your question, Father?
It does, yeah. And
No.
Andy, what did you risk by serving in the military? What was, because LGBTQ people have kind of a different risk that
Right.
they have, this kind of hiding risk, this watching out to be legally discharged or legally prosecuted or harassed.
Gay soldiers took on an additional risk to whatever the risk was that the baseline risk that straight soldiers took on, sort of a personal risk. But we all had that baseline risk. We always
Yes.
had, yeah.
What was the personal risk to you?
For the military?
Yeah. What was it? I
Well,
don't think you and I have ever talked about that, but what was it? What did it turn out to be? What was it for you to even go in?
I was always very curious about the military, as you knew, but I found out very quickly it's quite a dangerous place, even when you're not at war. And Candace, you mentioned you worked on a deck, right? So you're on a carrier, and a carrier deck is not a safe place either.
No.
So for infantry, it's friendly fire. I found out very quickly that you have more. You need to be more careful of the people around you, because we're constantly doing live fires than the and we didn't go to war, not really. That was a huge personal risk for me, just the people around me. And infantrymen are they're not exactly very stable individuals anyways. So there's a lot of fighting, a lot of drunkenness, a lot of drunk driving. So there was a lot of risk. But you know me, I didn't really mind it. Dad didn't really bother me at the time.
Scared me
Well,
that he
yeah,
would
it bothered
go
you.
through this,
Yeah,
but yeah.
it bothered my father.
Candace, how about for you? You talked a little bit about just all the hiding that you needed to do, and you were being kind of, what's the word? I don't know. Was it blackmailed or whatever? You were being
They
set up by a
investigated me.
coworker,
Yeah,
and
they did the command did an investigation. So I think the risks, I mean, it's everything. You give your childhood. I mean, you're 19 going in, you don't know anything. You get thrown into this world where you're getting screamed at, and they break you down so that you conform into what they need you to be, and then you just get thrown out into the real world of the military. And I got to my ship. I was on the Eisenhower. I got to my ship, and 30 days later, we were on deployment. And my mom was freaking out too. She was like, because I'm her oldest daughter, and my sister and I are 17 years apart. So it was a big deal. And, you're scared, you don't know anything. And then, being that young and coming from where I did, I still wasn't fully comfortable with being gay. So it really made me question who I was. So there was a lot of internal, like, is this who I really am? Because they're saying this is wrong and I could lose my job. I can get court-martialed for this. So is this what I really want to do? So there was a lot of like internal strife there. A lot of sitting out, on the flight deck at night going, just thinking, and then you're risking your life. We were on deployment. That first deployment was when the Osama bin Laden stuff was happening. So it was pretty intense. We had Iranian battle cruisers chasing us. They were burning all the oil fields, and we can see all that stuff. And our flight deck operations were intense. So we were all very tired. We were all very stressed out. They were taking Navy sailors and putting boots on the ground because they needed more support down there. I mean, it was just, there was a lot going on. And then having to try to figure out who you are or hide who you are just kind of added to that stress. And then my grandmother got sick during that deployment, and there was just a lot of stuff going on. So I think in a way it made me grow up really, really quickly. A different level of maturity had to kind of set in because I realized that there was things that were bigger than just me. I was a very small piece of that. But without me, I also contributed to that bigger picture. So having to quickly become an adult, getting thrown into that, where other kids were going to college, my friends are going to college, partying it up, and I'm over in the Gulf doing crazy stuff, trying to figure out who I am as a young woman. It was a lot. I struggled with it a lot. And the Navy has the boys club. And it took a while for me to break down that boys club. I had a chief that did not want me on the flight deck because I was a female and I would be a distraction. So I also had to fight those battles. And I was in the smoke pit and I could hear, they didn't know who I was. And one of my first classes was going to push me up on the flight deck, and they were sending me up there for training in the evening time because the first class that was running the flight deck, he was not sexist. And I heard some of the guys talking in the smoke pit, oh, they're bringing a girl up here. She's going to be a waste of time. And I was just kind of standing there listening. Then I just walked over and I'm like, that's me that you're talking about. And they just kind of instantly shut up. But I felt like I had to work harder to kind of prove myself, and break down that boys club. I eventually did, but it wasn't easy. I got overqualified. I got all my warfare pins. Like I did all this extra stuff. I was Sailor of the Year. I did everything I could just to prove myself. And I worked a lot of hours. I lost a bunch of weight, got some gray hair.
You gave a lot.
Yeah,
just to
I
try
did.
to be accepted. Sounds like
Yes.
you gave up and beyond the call of duty, beyond your job description. You gave a lot just to be accepted.
Yeah, there was a guy from South Carolina that used to work in old Peterbilt trucks. He would spend a lot of time with me in the evening times teaching me things about engines and things so that I could. So I had some good people that helped me get to where I was, and he knew who I was and how I was outside of the military scene. So he kind of just took me under his wing, and when other people would say things, like in the guys' barracks, or he would let me know some of the conversations. He'd be like, hey, don't worry, I got you. He would kind of look out. So it was nice to have some people that were allies.
This is a personal question, so feel free not to answer it. Were you ever sexually harassed in the Army or the Navy?
There's not to an extreme extent, but when the guys get drunk, they get fresh. And I'm a little tougher, so I've had to punch a couple people. It's just you get in with that, or one of my guy friends would be with me and somebody would want to, like, I had one drunk guy, I don't even know he wasn't part of our division. We were actually in Dubai and we weren't allowed to leave. They called it a sandbox. We weren't allowed to leave that. They built this, we dropped anchor and they built like a place for us to kind of hang out, brought in some food vendors and some music and stuff because we had been there. We hadn't seen a port in over 65 days. So they stopped there and everybody was just getting trashed and the music, and this guy just grabbed me and I'm like trying to push him back. A couple of my buddies had to pull this guy off. But nothing too extreme. With me becoming one of the more
That's
senior
pretty
females.
extreme.
Well, being one of the
Not for
more
the military.
Not
yeah.
for the military, yeah.
Being a more senior
No.
female, I always had to look out for the junior females. And some of the other girls, there was some real serious stuff that had happened to them because people just have evil in their minds, I guess, or in their hearts.
I'm sorry that happened. And I'm wondering if it's still happening.
Yes,
I
it
hear
does.
it's still happening to women in the military.
Yeah, it's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Was it huge during your time, Andy, too? Did you see it around you?
Yeah, when we interacted with female soldiers, yes, but we were in an infantry division, so we would see female soldiers in support capacities or logistics. So most of it was from hearsay. You'd hear stories, so I wouldn't actually witness that stuff. But knowing the soldiers I knew in the battalion, yeah, it's not shocking. It's not shocking. because you could see you interact with them when you're on pass or on R&R or out in the civvy world, and you could see how they interact with females in the civilian world. So, but women in the military, I mean, they it's like they're clear. The ones I interacted with, the stuff I saw was like, you don't fuck with them. You don't
Yeah.
do it.
You got to
They
be
had to be
another,
very, very clear about that.
you got to be
Yeah.
another level of tough. You learn how to set some boundaries real quick.
Yeah,
Another
that's one thing I
level of
noticed. Yeah.
tough. I like that. Another
Yeah,
level of
the women soldiers are
yeah.
they're soldiers. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
Andy, was there any visibility of LGBTQ people around you at all?
there were always like rumors. You know, a couple guys that get caught in inflagrante, is that what they call it? Um, in the Humvee or the deuce and a half or whatever.
Having sex with each other, I think we call it.
Yeah, probably not right. Yeah,
I
basically
mean,
having
that would
sex.
actually
But
happen, and it happened in your unit or around you, or
yeah, it happened in the battalion. There was a couple guys in the headquarters company, but they didn't get disciplined. It never got to command's ears. In other words, there was no complaint made because that's what has to occur in Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So there has to be somebody reporting it to command, and then they have that whole process they go through. Probably what happened with you, Candace. Somebody but initiated an investigation. But you got to remember that I remember telling you those stories about the guys in Honduras, and I told you the guy and the Honduran colonel at that party in
I don't remember
Comayagua.
it. Tell us
You don't
again.
remember it? Yeah, but he basically it was like an international incident, and he was just drunk and he was like pawing at it was terrible. So he got booted out of the country.
And who was that? That was a
That was my fire team leader in Honduras.
who
Guy
was he
named
pawing?
the Honduran colonel's daughter. Yeah, yeah. It's just a typical infantryman. So he gets booted out, and then he was a terrible soldier. And we were assured that we would never see him again, that he was going to be processed out, discharged. But he shows up another year later in a different company in the same battalion. So the military
Transfer
is
your
not very.
problem.
It's like it's the priest problem, right? The Catholic priest problem. Yeah.
Candace, it sounds like from what you said that there were a number of LGBTQ people visible in the aircraft carrier. Do you guys kind of hang out? Well, tell me whatever your experience was.
You kind of knew who was who. There were some that were questionable. And then there was about 6 of us girls after the first deployment that we all were gay, and we all decided to get an apartment together. So it was just it was fun. It was wild, but it was, we all kind of just clicked up.
Mhm.
You kind of knew who else was, and it was just kind of one of those kind of head nods, like, we see you kind of things. But we never wanted to give anybody away because we didn't want anybody else to get in trouble. We'd see people that we'd see at the club on Friday night, and it would just kind of be like yep, I see you. And we just kind of keep going kind of thing. But it was my little group that we had. We were pretty solid. And we also had some other friends that kind of came in that weren't part of the LGBTQ and would help support us and kind of help us hide some of this stuff. So
Mm.
it was nice to kind of have that. But 2 of the girls, both of them were my proteges because you have the whole mentor protege program. And they were in the same, on the ships, you have your racks, the coffin lockers, and there's 3 on this side and there's
Mm-hmm.
3 on this side.
I don't
Well,
know. Yeah.
one of them slept on one, and on the top one, the other one slept in the middle, and then we had somebody else on the bottom one, and then I was in the middle rack. Well, they had gotten reported that they were sharing a rack, and it all came down because I was the most senior female in the berthing with all the other females, so it got reported. It went up past me. I had to go to captain's mast for them to defend them, to say no, they're just friends. She's married because she was married. I'm like, I know them. We live together. this is not happening. So there was times that I've had to lie for people too, just so that they didn't get court-martialed. It was a
That's
Well,
right.
it's like we're
Adultery is still UCMJ, right? They
yes,
still enforce that
yes,
sometimes.
they do. They were focusing more on the female to female thing, though. Somebody
Yeah.
got upset about it, but they were getting a little wild. This was on our second deployment, and they were going out and
they were more
drinking.
visible.
Yep,
Yeah.
making themselves seen. So I had to sit them down and be like, you guys need to chill out. People see what you're doing, people start talking. All it takes is one person. I don't want to go to
There's that
Cactus
old
Pass
line,
again.
was it don't be a target? That was the
Yep.
old infantry line.
Well, it just, LGBTQ people in the military, just it feels like we're a spy agency. So
Yeah.
we're all fellow spies, and we know who the fellow spy is, and they're on our side, and we keep all the secrets, and it puts us in a situation of lying and lying to command, and um, at least that's what used to be. I'm hoping that has changed now. I don't know if it has changed, but have you
They
heard
did
anything?
end the policy. They end the policy.
They ended the policy. It's a
Yeah.
question is whether in actual behavior are LGBTQ people safe in the military now. I don't know. I haven't had any contact with any real current people. Have you, Candace? Do you have any feeling for
I
it?
still have friends that are in, and since they removed the don't ask, don't tell, it did get a little bit easier, but it's still, you kind of just don't talk about it. And I don't know if that's just because that's the way we were brought up in the military, because even my wife and I now, we're not very like, hey, it's just if somebody asks us or it's obvious, especially when we go out with our daughter, but we don't talk about it unless we're really asked about it. And I think that's just part of the conditioning. So the two girls that I was just telling the story about, they ended up getting married when it got legal. They're divorced now and they're married to two other women. And I think that, and they're getting close to the retirement age of it. And I think they're just
Mm.
kind of ready to be done to get out of it. But it's still kind of a don't ask, don't tell. It's not like a comfortable where they're going to say, oh, yeah, my wife,
Military will always be a very conservative place, I think,
hmm
in that
which
way.
lingers for years after.
I know. I was at 10 years. I had 6 years of National Guard, 4 years active duty Navy, and Andy was now 2 years old, 3 years old, something like that. And I really liked the Navy in many ways. Being a psychologist, traveling all different kinds of places, they were going to send me to Guam and to Antarctica. And all. It would have been a very interesting life and applying the skills that I had, but it was too dangerous for me to be if they found out I was bisexual. My wife knew, but I was in a time where being out was really, really dangerous anywhere. So I was not a particularly courageous person. So I was not out really very much. And it really influenced my decision. I did seriously consider staying, but it was just, I wasn't going to live like that. I knew in the arc of my life, I didn't want to live like I was, some kind of illegal person who was hiding, sort of like an illegal immigrant in the military. I wasn't really legal. So that
Sort of
was
a
a
low
big
grade anxiety,
low
Yeah.
grade
at all
anxiety. And
at all times over it, right?
yeah, we had a chief of service who was, we were up in San Francisco area when I was in a hospital up there, who was like flamingly gay. I mean, very, very feminine, blonde
Good place for it.
captain, Navy captain, and scared me what he was doing. He was skating, but everybody knew it. The command must have known it. I think that was the reason he probably never made admiral because they
You're not
knew
gonna
it.
get a star for that one. No.
He was a really bright fellow, board certified psychiatrist, chief of service. He could have gone on to a more administrative position in the medical corps, but he didn't. And the corpsmen around us, at least half of them seemed to be gay. A lot of the male corpsmen, a lot of them. It was hard for me to tell. I had no knowledge of women and uh, as far as gay people and what they were like or how they presented or anything. but I think they were very prominent in the Navy Medical Corps and as nurses, senior nurses. As I look back on it, as corpsmen, I remember being approached by a psychiatry resident. I was a staff psychologist, and he wanted to have a relationship with me. Absolutely freaked me out, and I was very attracted to him. And he told his supervisor, apparently, I started figuring this out later. He told his supervisor, he was a resident, so he had a psychiatrist supervisor, what was going on. And I remember and I was in a slightly senior position to him because I was staff psychologist. So to this resident, so this attending psychiatrist got with me and he said, watch out for this guy. I remember these words. He has the morals of a billy goat. I remember him saying that to me. I'm going, well, that sounds like your average gay man to me, but it's like
you get to say that, Dad. You only get to say that.
But it was a dangerous thing, but it was a tantalizing thing for me. It was like, and then probably to be happy later. I don't know that I could have ever made it through 20 years because in order to deal with the depression that eventually overtook me before coming out, I had to then deal with my sexuality and be much more open about it and have that be reflected in relationships, have that be reflected in my lifestyle. Candace, I was wondering, I had a question. Were gay men visible to you at all on the aircraft carrier? I mean, were they allies at all or were they pretty separate?
No, some. So you can kind of tell, like the ones that were kind of obvious, and it being kind of a tomboyish looking type female, it was kind of like I don't know, there was like this weird unspoken language. There was like a look, and it was kind of a head nod. And
Yes.
then, we'd see each other. And I worked so much that while we were on the ship, especially on deployments, it was hard for me to interact with anybody. But then I'd see them at the bar. And then I'd be like, okay, hey, how are you? And then we'd start talking. And I did have a couple gay men that were friends of mine as well, that we'd all kind of hang out. And I had a couple of my lesbian friends marry my gay male friends to kind of keep up that image. Like it was a very common thing for us to marry males or for the males to marry the females just so that we could kind of try to put that image up.
Is that what it's called, Dad? It's beards, right?
I think that's the correct crude term for it. Yes.
Okay, I don't want to be pejorative.
I don't know. I'm not. Yeah, I've heard it.
But it was, and they struggled too. And when they were in their birthings with the males, I feel like the female birthings were a little bit harsher than the male birthings were. Some of these females were pretty intense, like very anti-gay, very anti-LGBT.
Really?
There would be lots of confrontations. I had to break up a few other people getting accused, getting into arguments. I'd have to break them up, sit them down, be like, you don't knock it off. Like it's just having those conversations too while you're in the middle of a deployment. It's like, we're all out here, we're not leaving. So we need to learn how to get along. If you don't like her because of what you think, stay away from her. These kinds of things. And then if I knew that other person was gay, I'd be like, listen, you need to chill out, tame it down a little bit. If somebody knows and they catch on to you, you have a lot to risk. So just bring it down. But having to tell somebody to bring down who they are sucks. That is a hard thing. Like telling somebody that you have to hide who you are is not a fun conversation to have. And
yeah, that's not fair.
I don't think I was fully comfortable or confident with who I was or my sexuality. I went to that DC march, that equality march. All 6 of us girls that lived together, we went to that equality march in DC. I think it was 2008, somewhere around there. And it was kind of eye-opening because I got to see people, successful people, families, be out and open and proud of who they were. And that was part of the trigger that made it easier for me to transition out of the Navy. Because I was like, you can be normal. You don't have to hide who you are. You get to be happy and live your truth. And I wanted that. So, and then it just made me more confident with who I was and my sexuality. And trying to coach and help some of the newer people that were coming into the command, like how to operate without getting yourself in trouble. And then when I went to shore duty, it was nothing like it was on the boat. The boat was a whole different. Yeah, it
It
was.
was
That's
easier
very
ashore.
intimate.
What's that?
It was easier ashore.
Yes,
That makes
because
sense.
we went home
We
every
weren't all
day.
thrown together.
Forced
You
intimacy on deployment.
you went home every day. You'd have duty every other weekend. You weren't stuck with people. You didn't get to see how they lived. It was a little easier to hide yourself. So when I got to shore duty, it was like I felt normal. We
Hmm.
still didn't talk about who I was outside of work, but I felt like a normal person when I went home.
There was less threat to you.
Yes,
There must have been not much. I mean, you must have been deployed over and over again during
I
that
was.
period.
Yeah,
That was a busy period in American war.
yes, it was. Long deployments too.
You've really clearly shown the risks for LGBTQ people, Candace. I appreciate it. Andy, were you ever injured on active duty?
I threw my back out a couple times.
It all counts. Because there's apparently a very high percentage of active duty people do get injured, and maybe a high percentage of people in general in this kind of jobs get injured.
Well, it's physical. I mean, the infantry is like you're doing stuff where you're likely to get injured. So, yeah, it's what they pay you for. You know, the biggest, I've told you this before too, Dad, hearing loss. Candace probably knows this too. Huge problem in the military. People don't wear their ear protection.
Do you think
Even
Maybe
when
your
you
are they
loss?
do,
better at it now? Are they better at it now, Candace?
I wore mine all the time, and
Yeah, I did too. I guess I
and
still got
my
my hearing.
right ear. Well, I'm losing it in my right ear.
You're losing
Oh
your
yeah.
right ear, and is it from the aircraft
Flight deck.
engines or from?
It's being on the flight deck. I used to wear earplugs and a cranial, but I'd have to keep the earplug out because I had a microphone. I had walkie-talkie set, and people had to be able to get a hold of me. So this ear, which is the ear that isn't affected, is fine, but my right ear is, yeah. So it's a.
You know, Candace, I was on the Eisenhower
Were
in
you?
'94. We went down to Haiti. They took us down to Haiti on that,
It's a fun
but
ride, huh?
they loaded it with helicopters
Huh.
with
Yeah, we.
Blackhawks.
Andy, did you lose any hearing? Do you know yet?
No, my hearing
No.
came out intact. There were a couple close calls. You know, told you about that guy who popped off that belt to 60. I was his AG, and he didn't give me the warning, and I almost throttled him. And my ears were ringing for weeks after that, but there was no permanent damage. So, but no, I didn't. I got lucky. I mean, there were a lot of really close calls with discharges of weapons.
Yeah, didn't you have a sergeant come into a cement
Yeah,
room
top.
and
Yeah, yeah. First sergeant
discharge?
was doing we were the we were doing we were cleaning and doing function checks on our 16s in a concrete bunker, and the first sergeant, a function check is you have to pull the trigger, so the pen goes down and he didn't clear his rifle. He pulled the trigger and he discharged around and went bing bing. It was too quick to even be scared. It was just afterwards you were like, did that just happen? Yeah,
That's crazy. It's so quick, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah. So my first day I went to, so funny. Andy ended up at Fort Irwin. I
All
went
right.
there. I went
Beautiful
there my
Fort Irwin.
first day as a National Guard officer cadet. I was still an enlisted man, but I was a cadet. And walking down, I had no uniform. We're walking down a line of tanks where they're not firing the main gun. They're firing, I think it was Fees off the top, and 50 caliber machine guns, and a round cooks off and it blows up in this guy's face, and the chamber heated up. He falls off the tank right next to me as I'm walking by, and they carry him off, and I'm going, okay, here we go. Fortunately, I was never injured. I was in a very safe kind of job. Being a psychologist, the main injury to you is hearing all the shit, hearing all the things that people are going through. and every now and then hearing PTSD problems that are so debilitating and so hurtful and so sort of a problem that just can keep on giving for decades afterwards. And so I would get a lot of those, and then I would get families of sailors it was usually a wife at home with two small children and in a city they'd never lived in, trying to hang on while their mate was out at sea for 6 months.
Whatever the
And
float.
the kids were getting abused or neglected, or the wife was depressed and all that. But listening is a lot easier than going through it. And so I watched a lot of people going through a lot of stuff. And it was the time when the Vietnam War was totally unpopular. And I couldn't go to an airport in my uniform. People would say stuff to you, and it was, like that.
That's right.
Yeah, but it was not, no, I wasn't really injured. I mean, the closest I got to being injured was somebody shot an M15 next to my ear because I had forgot my earplugs and we were doing live fire going up a hill, and both ears ended up numb for 2 days. It was like the outside of my ear was numb. So it's a dangerous business. Were you injured in any other way, Candace? Anything else happened to you? Did you drop anything?
I was GSC, so all the ground support, anything that supported an aircraft was my piece of equipment, and I worked on the flight deck, so like the big crash crane and the firefighting trucks and the tow tractors and stuff. That was all the equipment that I was responsible for. We had a flat tire, and I was trying to pull one of the tires up a ladder well that was like this, and it slipped and I went down with it. So I messed up my back, my ankle, and then I also have numbness in my hand because this
Well, that nerve, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's
that's right.
scar tissue.
It's right along
runs all the way up.
Yeah.
It's closing up on it right there, and lots of little ailments, but the biggest one was going down that ladder well with like 100-pound tire. So after that, I put it on the elevator. I made friends with the hangar bay chief, and I'm like, next time you send one up, I need to throw some tires on there.
And these are, none of the three of us you were in combat in a sense, Candace.
Yeah, just on
you were
the
running
ship.
combat operations off the coast. So yeah, you were.
Yeah, she's probably the closest of us, three of us.
Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom.
I always hated the operation names. They're so tacky.
There's a couple other ones too, but those were the big ones.
We all took different kinds of risks to be part of the military. What did we gain from it? What did you gain? I mean, for me, I got some of the best psychologist training I could have ever gotten anywhere. This huge variety, always supported with the best training. They sent me to amazing training as a young psychologist. I learned to lead because I was a platoon leader in the National Guard. I learned to make decisions and to relate to people that were very different than I was. I got to serve my country, which mattered a lot to me, to be able to do that. I wanted to be able to do that. But what did you guys gain? Andy, you want to talk about that? What did you gain from being in the Army?
I did not enjoy my military experience, but I did gain. In fact, I didn't like it at all. But I think it was good for me to because I grew up. I became a young adult in the military. I think I went in as kind of like an asshole teenager, and who wasn't particularly interested in college. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, except cause trouble. So I did get a sense of purpose out of it. I got out of the military, immediately enrolled in college, got the rest of my degree, got my contractor's license, and moved forward. And it taught me a lot about just like, you say this, Dad, don't sweat the small shit, right? And everything's small shit. It teaches you how to get yelled at. That's for sure. Teaches you how to get yelled at and not take it seriously, too seriously at least. That's what I got in the military.
Thank you.
I did not have an overriding need to serve the United States. I didn't have that sort of pure-heartedness to me, and I always envied that. The other soldiers I knew had that. I always envied that. But yeah, that's what I got out of it.
Thank you. Candace, what do you think?
Well, I love the military. Even through all of that, on the flip side, I felt like I needed to serve. I wanted to. I wanted to do something that was bigger than me. I wanted to give back. It did make me grow up very quickly. It makes you tougher. I like the don't sweat the small shit because, somebody criticizes you now and you're like, oh, okay, you can take it as constructive feedback, even if they're yelling at you and you're like, oh, okay, I need to fix this. It taught me how to be disciplined. It taught me how to become responsible and know that there's things that are bigger than me. Kind of humbled me in a way. Because, when you're a teenager, you go in, the world revolves around yourself. And it's like, oh no, there's more to this, the opportunity to travel, see different walks of life, meet those people, and the diversity that is there. Even though it's not all rainbows and unicorns. You've got the different walks of life and the different people that you meet throughout that. You learn something, you take a piece of that person with you. And then when you find your military family, that support is like something I've never seen before. And when I got out of the military, I had the hardest time becoming a civilian. That was the biggest challenge for me and my wife. We both struggled with it. And the support and the maturity. And we moved back to her hometown, and all of the friends that she went to high school with, just the conversations are different. The demeanors are different. What's important to us is different. It changes who you are as a person, but I liked who I was when I got out. I was proud of what I did.
It just made me think of so much of what I did get. Yes, because I was 19 when I went in, and I was a very naive, very oversensitive 19-year-old. And just going to 8 weeks of basic training at Fort Lewis, Washington was life-changing. It was just, and I'll never forget the training platoon sergeants that they taught me to laugh when the when the shit was really, you're crawling around in the mud and somebody's shooting over your head, and you learn to laugh at the whole thing, because you can either
It's quite
laugh
absurd, isn't it? It's
or
absurd.
you can just freak out. It's like I remember being in formation, and it was back then it was called what was called CBR, chemical, biological, radiological warfare. It was like, what the fuck is that? I don't know what that is.
The NBC.
So we're going to CBR today, and I'm going, well, that doesn't sound so bad. So we're all in formation, and they hit us with tear gas. Tear gas is falling all around us, and then we're going to go in this tent and go in there without a mask for so much time. Well, this all freaked me out. This is scary for me, but I found I could do it. Because they teach you how to do it. They teach you how to do really weird stuff and put up with it. And there's a camaraderie in the suffering. It's kind of like, I wish, maybe we could add some wishes here, because we're coming towards the end of our time, and it's been just amazing talking to you two, by the way. You learned some more even about my son. I wish that I could have been, I kind of envy you, Candace, because you had some gay sisters, and I wish I had that in the National Guard and in the Navy. I wish I'd had some gay brothers or bisexual brothers, because that's really what I am. It would have been nice to have that community, and maybe I would have developed that over time. Maybe I would, but it was too freaking scary for me. But wish that had happened. What would be? So I would have wished to serve openly. Maybe I would have stayed. Maybe, I don't know. Candace, what do you wish?
I wish I would have stayed. I wish that the shiny glitteriness of being a civilian and being able to be open in who you are wasn't so enticing. And I would have stayed so that I could, because things change. And I mean, even right now, things are changing. So when Don't Ask, Don't Tell got taken away, there was like a sigh of relief. And then now things are a little challenging, but I would be able to say that I served my country for 20 years. I did my duty, just that, I don't know, there's a pride that I get. I used to walk through the hangar bay and just look around, and just this overwhelming sense of pride would take over. Or being out in the middle of the ocean, I would just be proud of what I was doing. I haven't felt that since
kind of an amazing thing you were doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
where you're working on aircraft in the middle of an ocean on a city of thousands of people. It's like
A floating
astounding.
city. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
6,000 people on a ship on
The
deployment.
logistics of the military, they just blew my mind. I remember that. It's just like just how much material they move around. It's like, ugh, it's
Andy, do you
amazing.
have any wishes?
For the military,
Yeah, the way you wish it had been.
I wish it had been completely freaking different. I mean, I didn't find much competency in my infantry unit. I was not pleased. I wasn't confident going to war with those guys, honestly.
You didn't feel like you had good leaders. I think you said that.
Well, it was a weird time in the military. Those nine, like there was a downsize moment. Remember, Clinton was downsizing everything too. Remember, I was originally supposed to go to Fort Ord in California, which is Monterey, and then they got it on the closed list, and they sent me to Fort Drum. So right off the bat, I was irritated, and a lot of it is just me because I had fantasies about the military, right? What it should. And I grew up on your stories, and of course I watched the movies and read the books. So I had this whole idea of, and actually I knew a lot about the military already, organizationally, and how the ranks worked, and divisions and battalions, and all that stuff. But the real thing was just like, and maybe I picked the wrong branch. I picked infantry. I mean, maybe
Should
I
have
should
went
have
in the
picked something
Navy.
else. I just wanted to do that. Remember I told you that, Dad? I wanted to be the Corps. I wanted to be like the infantry,
And I said,
That's
why?
well, it's like the guts of the army. It's like
It's
these are the
true.
men on the ground. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's the,
But to change, yeah, I would change. And I think the military has gotten a lot better. To tell you the truth, from what Candace has told me, it's gotten a lot better. From what I've read, especially after 9/11, I wasn't that impressed with the military in my time serving there. It was kind of a chill, kind of goof off deployment. We'd go and do like we'd hang out in Honduran bars for 5 months. We had peacekeeping missions, and there were no wars.
you went to
Yeah,
Somalia, right?
yeah, that was only for a couple weeks. That was just when they needed to fill in some people because they were pulling out. It was right after that Black Hawk Down thing, and they were pulling out. They were shutting down the whole operation. They were shutting down the UN operation because 10th Mountain was under the UN command over there. So
Another garden spot where the
yeah, but yeah, I would change a lot of it, and I think it has changed. And I get fantasies, I get dreams in my head where I re-upped, where I'm still in, and I can't find my barracks room. It's very strange. Do you get those, Candace? Do you get dreams where you're still in? Yeah. So it's embedded in you.
And I can't close my eyes in the shower without losing my balance from the ship
Sea
moving.
legs.
Still,
and it and up
it's been 10
till
years.
maybe a month ago, I had a dream about being in the Navy and being a Navy
Yeah.
psychologist. And that's 50 years later. I'm still dreaming about it. What if I had completed my 20 or 30 years? What if I had been maybe I would have got out of the medical service corps and transferred into a line, been on a ship, because I love ships and I love, what ifs. But we all did what we did and we all served our country despite the risks that we took. And each of us took different risks. I think I took a less of a risk than the two of you. And Candace, I think you took huge risks.
Yeah, Candace, she's the combat vet here. So
So I thank you all for being here for this and for being there for your country. As much as we had mixed motives for going in, I had mixed, I got great training. I got to grow up a lot. So we landed our parachutes. Some of us were a little bit injured.
it's better than
But
a
we're
Lalo.
kicking.
You know what a Lalo is, Dad? That's a
That's
low
when it doesn't
altitude.
open at all.
It's a low altitude, low opening.
That sounds horrible.
Yeah.
But it's been so much fun. Thank you for
Well,
being with us.
thanks for having me.
Thank you.
So join us again for another podcast where we interview veterans and LGBTQ people. I want to thank our producer, Mitch McDonald, who put this all together and made it happen. And thank each of our guests, Candace Winters and Andrew Gayton. If you want to read a book about two gay men in the military in combat, pick up Love and Country. It's a novel by Northampton Press. You can also see the movie that Mitch and I worked on by the same name, award-winning feature film that's on Tubi and Amazon. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you for coming to our first podcast of Halo, Love and Country. We want to thank Candace Winters, Andy Gayton for their wonderful participation. We also want to thank Cynthia Leonard for her technical assistance.